This is the story of an unlikely hero who was born with all the gifts, all the talents, riches, resources, creativity, and the ability to love and be loved that the world has to offer. But early on, those gifts had not been revealed to him. He didn't know they were his for the taking. And as the young hero grew and matured, he saw others with these gifts, and he longed for them. But those who had inadvertently hidden the gifts from the hero had also convinced him that he wasn't worthy of such things, and would likely squander or lose them, even if he had the fortune of having them. The hero had been told again and again that he must work hard, keep his nose to the grindstone, and stay in line, and maybe if he's lucky, someday, many years down the road, if ever, he might work his way out of the stable and earn a little piece of land for his own. And this became his belief. For years, he remained in servitude of those disempowering beliefs, even when the opportunity to step up and be more, do more, to prove himself worthy presented itself, as it had many times. He'd shy away from it, thinking, no, that's not for me. I'm fine doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't want to risk my job in the stable. Plus, I couldn't really do that anyway. Saying no had become his habit, his life, you might say. But in his heart, he agonized because the deepest resources of his core told him he knew that there was more, that he could be more, than he was more. Until one fateful day, he was faced with a challenge and a life and death decision that required him to be bigger and more courageous than he had ever been before, bigger than he ever thought he could be. The challenge, the mission, you might say, was to rescue the Chosen One from the dark castle tower where he had been held captive for countless years. The hero knew, however, that this journey would require him to walk away from the comfort and safety of his current circumstances, question his own beliefs and capabilities, and somehow be able to find the courage within himself to enter and ultimately pass through the dreaded dark forest of no return, wade almost blind through the neck-high quagmire of self-doubt, face and conquer the vicious fire-breathing dragon, and somehow climb to the top of the castle tower, where then the Chosen One and he would leap to freedom. After painstakingly thinking about it, thinking through all the options and all that would be required of him, he determined that there's no way in hell he could do it. The task is too great, he said to himself. It's impossible. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough, resourceful enough, or well-equipped enough to do it. He also knew that if he didn't try, the Chosen One would remain imprisoned for eternity. And perhaps worse, he himself would begin to wither and die inside. He knew that he had to do it. He had to try, and that he was the only one that could do it, whether he believed he was up for the task or not. He had to try. And so he took a deep breath, steadied his body, and reached deep down into his core to find the courage, the power, and the trust to step up and accept the challenge. And so, the hero's journey began. Along the way, his mettle is tested, as is his courage, his fortitude, and most importantly, his faith, which is challenged again and again. And with every victory, he resolves to be stronger. He becomes stronger, like the forging of metal in the fire. Along the journey, a new belief that began to take shape, a belief that he does have what it takes, that he was born worthy of the gifts, and that he has magnificence within him. The newfound belief and trust in himself provides the hero the much-needed courage to continue his journey, as well as a new map for going deeper and deeper into the dangerous, uncharted territory. He knew intuitively that what he was seeking, the very purpose of his journey, and all the rewards lie beyond the dark forest, beyond the quagmire. And he was prepared in body and spirit to go all the way. But soon, the dark forest of no return left him bloody and beaten. The quagmire had all but choked the life out of him. He now doubted he was capable. He doubted if he could make it all the way, or even go one step further. But suddenly there it was, right in front of him, the castle walls. He had made it that far without even realizing he had done so. It was at that moment that he encountered the beast. It appeared suddenly, as if it had risen up from someplace deep down inside himself, perhaps from his very soul, as a massive, fire-breathing dragon. He had heard rumors from other villagers about the dragon and how it would ruthlessly devour anyone who tried to pass. Few had tried. Most would turn back and run back to the safety of the village at the first sign of the dragon. Others would freeze. Most of them didn't turn out so well. But there were also stories of a few worthy heroes who would stand and fight. Not all were victorious. Only those who were armed with the right weapons, and most importantly, the right purpose. A purpose that went beyond themselves. Those courageous few became legends in the village and inspired admiration and action in others like it had in him. But the mere sight of the dragon had him doubting everything he had recently come to understand and believe about himself during his journey, and the fear began to rise up in his throat. He was faced with an almost paralyzing decision: to quickly turn and run back to the safety and comfort of his village, freeze and hope the dragon doesn't see him, or embrace the core truth about what he's come to believe about himself during the journey as the truth, and with only a simple bow and 10 small arrows, confront and defeat this dragon. The decision, although urgent, became more difficult as the fear of what might happen if he lost, if he failed, and the doubts about his own ability began to rise to the surface. The temptation to turn back and run like hell became almost overwhelming. But then he remembers why he started this journey in the first place, and why he must complete it. He remembers that it's not just about him. He remembers that the journey and all the challenges he faced along the way had a greater meaning that went beyond self. It was about freeing the chosen one. It was also at that moment that he realized that he wasn't facing the dragon alone, nor had he made the journey alone. He did so with the help of God, the prayers of those people who loved him, and his faith in an abundant universe that he can be and is more than he once believed he was. It was that faith that compelled his next action and moved his arm almost without being consciously aware of it to pull from the quiver the first 2 of his 10 small but powerful arrows. As he loaded the 2 arrows simultaneously into the bow, pulled back on the string, and began to take aim, he suddenly realized he had locked eyes with the beast. And instead of seeing hate, rage, malice, or even anger, he could see only fear and sadness. And at that moment, he himself felt no fear. He felt only love and forgiveness for the beast. What happened next is the stuff of legend. Before he could launch the 2 small arrows, the dragon had dropped its massive head and began to recede. Then, as if commanded by a higher force, the dragon wrapped its massive body and tail around the castle tower, creating a scaly ladder for the hero to climb. It led directly to the tower window. Once inside, he could see a small figure standing over in the dark corner. He approached and said, "I'm here to rescue you. To take you away from this place." He reached out and took his hand, and as he did, he could just barely make out the outline of a face. It looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. At first, the man was reluctant to step forward out of the shadow, but ultimately yielded to the gentle tug and encouragement of the hero. As the slightly familiar figure finally stepped out from the shadows and into the light, our hero was shocked and breathless, and having lost the ability to remain standing, quickly dropped to his knees. He was overwhelmed by what he saw. The figure was no longer just vaguely familiar. He was now certain he was looking at himself. And what he saw at that moment was the core truth about himself, as if a layer upon layer upon layer of crust had been peeled away, leaving only the powerful and magnificent radiant light he had come into the world with. He could see and feel only infinite potential, creativity, and abundance. What looked back at him was his own 4-year-old face and spirit, with all the curiosity, wonder, possibility, imagination, and magnificence of an innocent child. He could also see what appeared to be several warm beams of light passing through himself, radiating from a place of infinite power, love, and wisdom. The light carried with it resources, ideas, solutions, and knowledge in such abundance that it was nearly incomprehensible. He was suddenly aware that he could feel the presence of God. But this wasn't God. This was one of God's magnificent creations. At that moment, he was compelled by a powerful and irresistible magnetic-like force, pulling him up off his knees and towards the figure that stood in front of him. He also became aware at that moment that the gaping, open wounds he had suffered while fighting his way through the dark forest, and his struggle to stay above the quagmire of self-doubt that had gnawed at his strength for the remainder of his journey, were suddenly and miraculously healing, leaving only battle scars and the empowering memory of having survived the ordeal. And still he was drawn closer and closer to the magnificent figure of himself, until the two had fully embraced. At that moment, he knew, they knew it was time. They had to leap to freedom now, right now. Hand in hand, they dashed for the window, which was the only way out. Together, they stood on the thick stone ledge of the tower window, as if on the precipice of a great chasm between want, need, and desire, an infinite possibility, between bondage and freedom. For just a moment, they looked at each other one last time, and in their hearts and minds, they silently said, "I love you, I love you, thank you." Then, not knowing if they would even survive, but having the faith to try, hand in hand they leapt. When he landed, the hero was alone. For just a moment, he was saddened by the thought that only he had made it, and that he was alone. But in that same instant, he realized he wasn't alone, and that not only had he survived, but he had been transformed by the journey, but most importantly, by the leap itself. He felt an almost overwhelming sense of humility, and at the same time, an empowering sense of energy, unbridled ambition, and unstoppable confidence. He wanted to climb to the highest peak and celebrate, but he still had work to do. He had to return to the village and share his story. Through the results of his magnificent journey, he would inspire in others the same renewed faith, courage, and determination that he was able to muster to take his leap of faith. And as he took his first steps towards the beginning of a new journey, he glanced back at the castle and the tower that had held him captive for so long, and it wasn't what he expected to see. The beast was nothing more than a small, insignificant little dragonfly, and the tower window was only a few short feet from the ground. He could have leaped to freedom at any time.